The space station Draskar Prime hung in the void like a glowing city of metal and light. Ships of all shapes and sizes moved in and out of its docking bays. It was a place of trade, diplomacy, and on rare occasions, unexpected encounters. Captain Valtrix, Zivor, stood tall in the grand hall of the station. Her violet skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and her silver eyes scanned the crowd with precision. She wore the sleek, black armor of the Sci-Fi Dominion, a warrior race known for their discipline and strength. Her long, dark hair was pulled back into braids, each woven with metallic bands that marked her rank. She was here on official business. The Sci-Fi were forming an alliance with the Terrans, humans, as they called themselves. It was an uneasy partnership. The Sci-Fi valued order and control, while humans were unpredictable, emotional, and reckless. And the most reckless of them all seemed to be standing right in front of her. Lieutenant Adrian Cross had the relaxed posture of a man who feared nothing. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, his uniform neat but worn like he had been on a long journey. His green eyes sparkled with amusement as he studied Valtrix. Unlike the Sci-Fi, who spoke in formal tones, Adrian's voice carried an easy confidence. "So," he said with a smirk, "you're the famous Captain Valtrix. I expected someone taller." Valtrix narrowed her silver eyes. "And I expected a Terran with more respect." Adrian grinned. "Oh, I have plenty of respect. I just keep it in storage for special occasions." The tension between them was clear. The hall was filled with delegates from both sides, watching carefully as the two officers interacted. The alliance depended on their cooperation. A Sci-Fi attendant stepped forward, handing Valtrix a ceremonial scroll. It was tradition for the highest-ranking officer to seal an agreement with a gesture of dismissal. For the Sci-Fi, that meant pressing their lips lightly against the recipient's forehead. It was a simple, emotionless custom, meant to signify that negotiations were concluded. Valtrix turned to Adrian. "Kneel," she ordered. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "It is our tradition," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do not make this difficult." He sighed, but his smirk didn't fade. Slowly, he bent one knee before her. Valtrix placed her hands on his shoulders, leaned down, and pressed her lips lightly against his forehead. The moment lasted only a second, but something was wrong. A strange heat spread through her chest, a feeling she had never known before. The second her lips touched his skin, a spark ignited deep inside her, a pulse of warmth, of something forbidden. She froze. Her body betrayed her, and she felt her breath hitch. Adrian, meanwhile, looked up in surprise. He was clearly not expecting this. His smirk faded, replaced by something else. Curiosity. Amusement. Silence filled the hall. The Sci-Fi delegates watched in confusion. The humans, however, had very different expressions. Some looked amused. Others whispered amongst themselves. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He reached up, his fingers brushing against Valtrix's wrist, and said in a soft voice, "I didn't know we were at that stage of our relationship already, Captain." Valtrix's heart pounded. Relationship? What was he talking about? A Sci-Fi commander stepped forward, glaring. "Human," he growled. "You misunderstand." That was a formal gesture, nothing more. But Adrian only grinned. "Oh, I understand just fine." Valtrix stepped back, trying to regain her composure. She was a warrior, a leader. She was not supposed to feel like this. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, one thought burned in her mind. She had kissed a human once. And now, she wanted more. Captain Valtrix, Zivor walked swiftly through the metal corridors of Draskar Prime, her sharp footsteps echoing. She had never felt this way before. Her mind was a battlefield, her thoughts fighting against each other. The kiss had been a mistake, a formality, a meaningless gesture. So why did it keep replaying in her mind? Her lips still felt warm from the brief touch. It was absurd. The Sci-Fi were warriors, trained to control their emotions. Desire, attachment, Those were weaknesses. Yet, as much as she tried to push the moment away, it clung to her like a shadow. Vultrix turned a corner and entered the diplomatic chamber. The large room was filled with officials from both the HFY Dominion and the Terran Federation. They stood around a holographic map, discussing trade agreements and fleet movements. And there he was. Lieutenant Adrian Cross leaned against a control panel, arms crossed, his green eyes scanning the room with lazy amusement. His Terran uniform fit snugly around his broad shoulders, his dark brown hair slightly disheveled. When his gaze landed on Vultrix, a slow smirk appeared on his face. "Ah, Captain," Adrian said smoothly. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me." Vultrix stiffened. "I do not avoid anyone." He chuckled. "Good to know. Because I had a few questions about our cultural exchange." A flicker of heat rushed to her face, but she kept her expression cold. There was no exchange. It was a formal dismissal. Adrian tilted his head. "That's funny. In human culture, what you did was pretty personal." Vultrix's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I do not care for human interpretations. The matter is closed." Adrian grinned. "Sure, if you say so." She did not like the way he looked at her, like he knew something she didn't. It was frustrating. Sci-Fi were supposed to be unreadable, yet somehow this human saw through her. Before she could respond, a Sci-Fi commander, Primarch Exalven, cleared his throat. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Captain Vultrix, we must discuss the Voidborn Syndicate's recent attacks on our outposts." She forced her thoughts back to duty. "Of course, Primarch." The room shifted back to business, but even as Vultrix focused on battle strategies and fleet logistics, she felt Adrian's presence like a star burning too close. Later that evening, Vultrix stood alone on an observation deck, staring at the endless stars beyond the glass. The station's artificial lights cast a soft glow on her violet skin, but inside, she felt restless. Couldn't sleep. She turned sharply. Adrian stood at the entrance, hands in his pockets, watching her with a knowing smile. "I did not invite you here," she said coolly. "You didn't have to," he replied, stepping closer. "I figured I'd find you somewhere quiet, brooding over things you won't admit are bothering you." She exhaled sharply. "You assume too much." He leaned against the railing beside her. "Do I?" Silence stretched between them, the hum of the station the only sound. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice softer. "Look, I get it. Your people have rules. Discipline. No room for distractions. But here's the thing. You're not a machine, Vultrix. You're allowed to feel things." She clenched her jaw. "Feeling things makes you weak." Adrian shook his head. "No, denying them does." Vultrix turned away, but Adrian's words stayed with her. He was reckless, irritating, and far too confident. But he was also right. And that terrified her more than anything. A blaring alarm shattered the quiet of Drazkar Prime. The station's lights flickered red, and the deep voice of the automated system echoed through the halls. "Security breach detected. All personnel, report to battle stations." Captain Vultrix, Zevor snapped into action. Her sharp silver eyes scanned the control panel as she pressed her communicator. "Report," a frantic voice answered. "Voidborn Syndicate forces have infiltrated the lower levels. They've planted explosives near the power core." Vultrix cursed under her breath. The Voidborn Syndicate, a ruthless group of pirates and mercenaries, had been a growing threat. But to attack the station directly, that was bold. The doors to the command center hissed open, and Lieutenant Adrian Cross rushed in, his usual smirk replaced with a grim expression. His uniform was slightly ruffled, his green eyes filled with sharp focus. "You heard the news?" he asked. Vultrix nodded. "We need to stop them before they reach the core." Adrian rolled his shoulders. "Sounds like a good excuse for some teamwork." She ignored his tone and turned to the security monitors. The screens flickered, showing masked Voidborn soldiers planting charges in a dimly lit corridor. There were too many of them for a standard security team to handle. "We'll take the maintenance tunnels," Valtrix decided. "Faster access, less risk of running into their main forces." Adrian grinned. Finally, a date with some excitement. She shot him a glare, but he only chuckled and grabbed his plasma pistol. The tunnels below, the tunnels beneath Drazkar Prime, were dark and narrow, filled with the low hum of energy lines running through the station. Valtrix moved swiftly, her steps silent. Adrian followed close behind, keeping his pistol raised. "Do you always move this fast?" he whispered. She didn't look back. "Do you always talk this much?" "Only when I'm with someone interesting." Valtrix ignored the heat rising in her chest. Now was not the time for distractions. They'd reached a junction, and she motioned for Adrian to stop. She peered around the corner and spotted the enemy. 6 Voidborn operatives setting up their final explosives. 6 of them. 2 of us, Adrian murmured. "Great odds." "I take 4, you take 2, Valtrix replied. Adrian smirked. "See, that's unfair. At least let me have 3. Before she could respond, one of the Voidborn turned, eyes widening. Valtrix reacted instantly. She lunged forward, her combat blade slicing through the enemy's weapon before he could fire. A swift kick sent him crashing into the wall. The tunnel exploded into chaos. Adrian ducked under a blast, returning fire with deadly accuracy. One Voidborn fell, then another. Valtrix moved like a shadow, dodging plasma bolts, striking with precision. Within moments, the last enemy collapsed to the ground. Adrian wiped a smudge of dust from his sleeve. Well, that was fun. Valtrix knelt beside the explosives, scanning the controls. Her fingers moved quickly over the interface, deactivating the charges before they could detonate. A sharp beep confirmed success. She exhaled. "It's done." "Nice work, Captain," Adrian said. "Though, next time, maybe warn me before you start slicing people in half." She turned to him, still catching her breath. They were standing close, too close. In the dim tunnel, his green eyes held something unreadable. "You didn't hesitate back there," he said quietly. "Guess I was right about you." Valtrix frowned. "Right about what?" Adrian gave her a slow smile. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be." Something inside her twisted. He was too perceptive, too human. And for the first time in her life, Valtrix didn't know if she wanted to prove him wrong. The halls of Drazkar Prime were quiet again. The emergency lights had faded back to their normal glow, and security teams were clearing the remains of the Voidborn Syndicate's failed attack. Captain Valtrix, Zivor, stood near the station's central command. Her arms crossed as she watched the final reports come in. Her violet skin shimmered slightly under the soft lights, but her face was unreadable. Inside, however, she was still unsettled. The battle had been won. The station was safe. So why was her mind so restless? She knew the answer. Lieutenant Adrian Cross. He was standing nearby, casually leaning against a console, running a hand through his slightly messy dark brown hair. His uniform was still dusted from the fight, and a fresh scratch marked his cheek, but his green eyes still held that irritating sparkle, as if nothing ever truly worried him. "So," Adrian said, breaking the silence between them, "are we gonna talk about it?" Valtrix didn't look at him. "Talk about what?" Adrian smirked. "The fact that we just saved this station together. The fact that I'm still standing here instead of getting the usual Typhari dismissal treatment." She clenched her jaw. He was right. Normally, after a mission, she would report, regroup, and move on. But something about this felt unfinished. Adrian leaned in slightly. "Or maybe," he added, voice teasing but softer, "we should talk about how you looked at me after the fight." Valtrix turned sharply. "I did not." She stopped herself. Adrian just grinned. "Oh, you did. Just for a second. Like you were actually impressed." She exhaled slowly, forcing her heartbeat to stay steady. "You fought well, but that does not mean I care," Adrian finished for her, his voice playful. "Come on, Valtrix. You can admit it. We make a good team." She stared at him for a moment, then turned away. "You are reckless, undisciplined, and entirely too confident." Adrian chuckled. "And yet here we are. Alive. Mission accomplished. You can thank me anytime, you know." Valtrix shot him a glare, but before she could reply, Primarch Exalven approached. The Typhari commander was tall, with deep blue skin and glowing silver tattoos across his arms, marks of high rank. His expression was stern as ever. "Captain Valtrix," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "A report has arrived. The Voidborn Syndicate's attack was not random. Intelligence suggests they were after something specific." Valtrix immediately straightened. "What?" Zalvin's silver eyes flicked toward Adrian. "Not what. Who?" A heavy silence fell between them. Valtrix's mind raced. The Voidborn had targeted the power core, but if that was a distraction. She turned to Adrian. "They were after you." Adrian blinked, then let out a small, amused breath. "Huh, didn't see that coming." Zalven's gaze was cold. "You are not taking this seriously, human. The Syndicate does not waste resources. They wanted you alive." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his usual smirk fading just a little. "All right. That's unsettling." Valtrix's grip on her belt tightened. This changed everything. If Adrian was a target, then the situation was far more dangerous than they had assumed. She turned to Exalven. "We need answers. Immediately." The Primarch nodded. "Interrogations of captured Syndicate operatives have already begun. But for now, the Lieutenant must remain under our protection." Valtrix frowned. "You mean?" "He will not be left alone," Zalven said firmly. "You will personally oversee his safety." Adrian's smirk returned instantly. "Oh, now this is interesting." Valtrix groaned internally. She was a warrior, a leader, not a bodyguard for an irritating human. And yet, as much as she hated to admit it, the thought of keeping Adrian close did not bother her as much as it should. Captain Valtrix Zivor had been trained for war. She had led fleets into battle, faced merciless enemies, and survived impossible odds. Babysitting a reckless human, however, was not something she had prepared for. She marched down the corridors of Drazkar Prime, her boots striking the metal floor with precision. Behind her, Lieutenant Adrian Cross strolled lazily, his hands tucked into the pockets of his Terran uniform. His green eyes sparkled with amusement as he struggled to keep up with her pace. "You walk like you're on a mission," he remarked. "I am," Valtrix replied coolly. "Keeping you alive." Adrian grinned. "I appreciate the concern. Really. But I can take care of myself." She stopped so suddenly that he nearly bumped into her. Her silver eyes locked onto his. "You were nearly kidnapped by Voidborn operatives less than an hour ago." "Yeah, but nearly is the key word," he said with a wink. "I like to think I have a certain survival instinct." Valtrix exhaled sharply. "Reckless, undisciplined, and entirely too confident," she muttered. "You keep saying that, almost like it bothers you." "It does," she said without hesitation. Adrian chuckled. "Well, you're stuck with me now, Captain. Might as well make the best of it." She ignored him and kept walking. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She wasn't just bothered by his attitude. She was bothered by the way he made her feel. Private quarters, restricted access. Adrian let out a low whistle as he stepped into Valtrix's personal quarters. "Wow, I was expecting something colder, more military." The room was surprisingly spacious, with smooth metal walls, a large command console, and a meditation area in the corner. A long window revealed the vastness of space, stars glittering in the distance. The room was neat, but small personal touches were present. An ornate sci-fi blade mounted on the wall, a few historical data tablets stacked on a shelf. Valtrix set her weapons down with precision. "This is not a social visit, Lieutenant. You will remain here under my protection until we have more information about the Voidborn's intentions." Adrian flopped onto a nearby chair, stretching out. "So, I'm under house arrest." "If that is how you wish to see it," Valtrix replied, unamused. He smirked. "Could be worse. At least I get to enjoy your company." She rolled her eyes and turned to the console, checking the latest security updates. The Voidborn prisoners had not yet revealed why they had targeted Adrian. That was troubling. Adrian's voice broke the silence. "You really think they're coming back for me?" Valtrix didn't look at him. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Why me?" "That is what we need to find out." Adrian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't like being the center of a mystery." Valtrix glanced at him. "You seem to enjoy being the center of everything else." His lips twitched. "Touché." For a moment, there was only the quiet hum of the station around them. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. Adrian leaned back, his expression turning more serious. "You really think this is about more than just some random attack?" Valtrix hesitated, then nodded. "The Voidborn do not act without purpose. There is something about you they want." He ran a hand through his hair. "That's not exactly comforting." Valtrix studied him. Humans were resilient, but Adrian was different. He carried himself with a mix of confidence and carelessness, but underneath it, she sensed something else, something he didn't show often. "You are not afraid?" she asked. He met her gaze, his green eyes unreadable for once. "Oh, I'm afraid," he admitted. "I just don't let it stop me." Something about that answer stirred something unfamiliar inside her. Adrian Cross was a puzzle, and Valtrix was starting to realize that she wanted to solve it. The lights in Valtrix Zvor's quarters had dimmed to a soft glow, casting long shadows across the smooth metallic walls. The stars beyond the window gleamed against the vastness of space, silent and distant. Adrian Cross sat on the edge of a sleek, high-backed chair, tapping his fingers against his knee. His usual smirk was absent, replaced by a thoughtful frown. He had been stuck here for hours under Valtrix's watch, but his mind wasn't on the forced confinement. Something about this whole situation wasn't right. The Voidborn Syndicate was ruthless, sure, but they weren't reckless. They didn't waste time attacking high-security stations unless there was a valuable target involved. And somehow, that target was him. "Are you certain you don't have any classified information?" Valtrix asked, her voice calm but firm. She stood across the room, her arms crossed, silver eyes studying him carefully. Adrian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "If I did, don't you think I'd know?" "Humans have a history of hiding things from even themselves," she countered. "Memories can be erased. Identities can be altered." Adrian let out a dry laugh. "So now I'm some kind of secret agent who doesn't know he's a secret agent." Valtrix didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow step closer. "I do not believe in coincidences, Lieutenant. The Voidborn wanted you for a reason. We must uncover what that reason is before they strike again." Adrian met her gaze. He had spent years working alongside different alien species, but none had fascinated him quite like the Typheri. Their sharp features, their rigid discipline, their absolute control. And yet, Valtrix was different. She felt things. He could see it. She just didn't want to admit it. "You always this intense?" he asked, tilting his head. Valtrix blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "I am focused." "You're always focused," he said, a small grin returning to his face. "But right now, you're also worried." Her jaw tightened. A warrior must anticipate threats. "Sure," Adrian said. "But I think you're worried about me." Silence stretched between them. Valtrix did not answer immediately, but her expression hardened. "I am responsible for your safety," she finally said. "Nothing more." Adrian smirked. If you say so, Captain. She exhaled sharply, clearly choosing to ignore him, and turned back toward the security console. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. The hum of the station's systems wavered. The air suddenly felt heavier. Valtrix's posture stiffened. That was not a normal fluctuation. Adrian was already on his feet. Tell me that's not the Voidborn making this second attempt. Valtrix's hands flew over the control panel, bringing up a holographic display of the station's security feeds. Multiple power failures, unregistered signals detected near the docking bay. Adrian peered at the screen. That's right outside. A deep metallic clang echoed through the corridors. Adrian immediately drew his plasma pistol. They found me. Valtrix grabbed her weapon and turned toward the door. Then they will regret it. An unexpected visitor. The door to Valtrix's quarters slid open with a hiss, revealing a tall figure clad in dark, battle-worn armor. The intruder's helmet was sleek, with glowing red lines tracing the sides. Adrian tensed, gripping his pistol. Not Voidborn. Valtrix stepped forward, raising her blade. Identify yourself. The armored figure let out a distorted chuckle. Captain Valtrix, Z4. Lieutenant Adrian Cross. How fortunate that I found you both together. Valtrix's eyes narrowed. Who are you? The figure reached up, removing their helmet. Underneath was a striking alien woman with deep bronze skin and piercing amber eyes. Her short, dark hair framed a face full of scars, marks of someone who had seen far too many battles. My name is Kayla Saren, she said smoothly, and I'm here to save your life, Lieutenant Cross. Adrian blinked. Okay, that's new. Valtrix's grip tightened on her weapon. Explain. Kayla glanced at them both. The Voidborn weren't the only ones hunting you, Cross. There's something inside you that you don't remember. Something people are willing to kill for. Adrian's stomach twisted. That's not comforting. Kayla smirked. No, it's not. But if you want answers, you'll have to come with me. Because the people coming for you next. Her amber eyes darkened. They won't be as polite as I am. The tension in Valtrix Zvor's quarters was thick enough to cut with a blade. Adrian Cross shifted uncomfortably as Kayla Saren stood before him, her amber eyes sharp and unreadable. The battle-scarred alien had just claimed that the Voidborn weren't the only ones hunting him, that something inside him was worth killing for. Adrian wasn't sure which part of that bothered him more. Okay, he said slowly, keeping his plasma pistol ready. You can't just drop a bombshell like that and expect me to follow you blindly. Start talking. Kayla smirked. Smart. I like that. But we don't have much time. Valtrix's grip on her blade didn't waver. You have not earned our trust. Kayla sighed, crossing her arms. Fine. Quick version. She turned to Adrian. You ever heard of Project Revenant? Adrian frowned. No. Kayla gave a knowing look. That's because they wiped your memory. Silence. Adrian let out a breathless chuckle. Yeah, no, that's ridiculous. Kayla tilted her head. Is it? You're a decorated Terran officer, good in a fight, but no special training in intelligence or covert ops. And yet, an elite criminal syndicate just risked everything to capture you. She took a step closer. Ask yourself, Lieutenant, why? Adrian didn't have an answer. Valtrix narrowed her eyes. If this is true, prove it. Kayla reached into her belt and pulled out a small holodisc. She tossed it onto the table. A bright blue projection flickered to life, displaying classified Terran military files. Adrian stepped forward, his name displayed in bold letters at the top. But beneath that, status, classified, Project Revenant, memory reconstitution incomplete. His blood ran cold. This isn't real, Adrian muttered, shaking his head. Kayla's voice softened. It is. The Terran government did something to you, Lieutenant. Something they didn't want you to remember. And now, The Rom people have figured it out. Adrian swallowed hard. The pieces were falling into place. His skill in battle, his instincts, the way he sometimes knew things without knowing how. Was it all because of something buried in his mind? Valtrix remained silent, but Adrian could feel her watching him, studying him. "You're saying the Voidborn weren't after me," he said, his voice quieter now. "They were after whatever's locked inside my head." Kayla nodded. "Exactly." Adrian let out a slow breath. "Fantastic." Enemies in the shadows. A sudden explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered again, and alarms blared. Valtrix instantly activated the security console. Breach detected on Deck 17. Kayla cursed under her breath. "They found us faster than I thought." Valtrix turned to Adrian. "We move. Now." They sprinted into the corridor, weapons ready. The station's halls were eerily empty. Civilians had already been locked down. But the distant sound of metal boots clanking against the floor sent a chill down Adrian's spine. The enemy was already inside. They reached a lift, but before they could enter, gunfire ripped through the walls. A squad of armored mercenaries stormed toward them, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Adrian barely had time to react before Valtrix shoved him behind cover, returning fire with deadly precision. Kayla ducked beside them, grinning. "Well, I did warn you." Adrian shot her a glare. "Now is not the time for I told you so." He peeked over the crate, squeezing off a few shots. One mercenary fell, but the others kept advancing. Valtrix's voice was sharp. "We are outnumbered. We must retreat." Kayla tapped a device on her wrist. "I have a ship docked 2 levels down. If we reach it, we can escape." Adrian reloaded his pistol. "Then let's move before we end up full of holes." They broke into a run, dodging blasts as they weaved through the corridor. But as they reached the next hallway, a massive hulking figure stepped into their path. Tall, armored in black plating, with a glowing red visor. Adrian's stomach dropped. "That," Kayla muttered, "is very bad." Valtrix's grip on her blade tightened. "Who is he?" Kayla's jaw clenched. "That's Commander Raxus, and if he's here." The massive warrior raised his weapon, his voice deep and inhuman. "Adrian Cross. Surrender now." Adrian's pulse pounded. The enemy wasn't just coming for him anymore. They were here. And they weren't leaving without him. The hallway was deathly silent, except for the hum of energy weapons charging. Commander Raxus stood like a towering shadow, his black armor gleaming under the station's flickering lights. His red visor burned with a cold, mechanical glow. Adrian Cross's heart pounded. He didn't need Kayla to tell him that this guy was dangerous. He could feel it. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," Raxus said, his voice like grinding metal. "Come with me. Now." Adrian tightened his grip on his plasma pistol. "Yeah, I'm gonna have to say no." Raxus didn't react. He simply raised his massive shock rifle. Before he could fire, Valtrix Zivor moved. She shot forward like a bolt of lightning, her ciphery blade slashing toward Raxus's neck. Raxus blocked the strike with his armored forearm, the impact sending a shockwave through the corridor. He countered with a brutal punch, but Valtrix twisted away, her silver eyes blazing with focus. Kayla grabbed Adrian's arm. "We can't fight him head-on. We have to move." "Not leaving her behind," Adrian snapped. Kayla cursed but fired her blaster, forcing Raxus to take a step back. "Then help her. Fast." Adrian didn't need to be told twice. He aimed and fired 3 precise shots at Raxus's joints, 1 at his knee, 2 at his shoulder. The armor absorbed most of the damage, but the force staggered him. Valtrix seized the opening. She leaped, twisting midair, and slashed across his chestplate. Sparks erupted as her blade cut deep. Raxus let out a distorted snarl, his visor flickering. But instead of falling back, he lunged forward, grabbing Valtrix's arm in an iron grip. Adrian's stomach turned. No. With terrifying strength, Raxus hurled Valtrix against the wall. She hit hard, the impact shaking the metal plating. Valtrix. Adrian rushed forward, firing wildly. Raxus blocked the shots, turning his full attention to Adrian. "You are out of time, Lieutenant." A second later, the mercenaries appeared at the far end of the corridor, weapons raised. They were surrounded. Kayla gritted her teeth. This is getting worse by the second. Adrian clenched his jaw. They needed a way out. Fast. Then he saw it. A maintenance hatch just behind them. If they could reach it, they could drop to the lower deck, straight to Kayla's ship. He looked at Valtrix. She was already pushing herself up, shaking off the impact. Her silver eyes met his. She knew what he was thinking. Without a word, she moved. Valtrix launched herself at the mercenaries, striking before they could react. Her blade sliced through their ranks, forcing them to scatter. Kayla yanked open the hatch. Move. Move. Adrian dove inside first, landing hard on the metal floor below. Kayla followed, covering their backs. Valtrix was the last one in, slamming the hatch shut behind her just as gunfire exploded above. They ran. Escaped. Kayla's ship was docked in a small, private hangar. The sleek black vessel was already powered up, its engines humming with energy. The second they reached it, Kayla sprinted ahead, activating the ramp. "Get inside." Adrian turned, expecting to see Valtrix right behind him. Instead, she had stopped at the bottom of the ramp, her gaze fixed back toward the station. Adrian frowned. "Valtrix." She hesitated. For the first time since he met her, she looked unsure. "This is your fight," she said quietly. "Not mine." Adrian's chest tightened. He understood. She had spent her life protecting her people, following orders. Running now, it wasn't her way. But if she stayed, she wouldn't survive. He took a step forward. "I need you, Valtrix." She blinked, surprised. Adrian held her gaze. "I don't know what's buried in my head. I don't know who I was before all this. But I know one thing." He smiled slightly. "I don't want to do this alone." Valtrix exhaled. Then, slowly, she stepped onto the ramp. The second she was inside, Kayla punched the thrusters. The ship roared to life, lifting off just as Raxus and his forces stormed into the hangar. Adrian caught one last glimpse of the towering warrior, his red visor locked onto them, as the ship shot into the void. They were free. For now, a new beginning. The stars stretched before them, endless and unknown. Adrian leaned back in the co-pilot's seat, staring out at the vastness of space. His mind was spinning with everything that had happened. Kayla set a course away from the station, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "We're not safe yet. If Raxus was after you, others will be too." Adrian sighed. "Yeah, figured as much." Valtrix stood nearby, arms crossed. "We must uncover the truth before they do." Adrian nodded. He had spent his life wandering, never staying in one place too long. But now he had a purpose. He didn't know what secrets were buried in his past, but he was going to find out. And with Valtrix and Kayla by his side, he might just have a chance.